with his item without receiving the merchant's item. So fair exchange was compromised. Now, so we feel that fair exchange is needed in an e-commerce transaction, and that will ensure that either both the parties receive each other's items or none do. Now, other researchers have also said that fair exchange is extremely important, and sometimes researchers have used different terms to explain the same concept. For example, Bao has used the term true fairness, Ashokan has used the term strong fair exchange, and some researchers have argued that it's too much to expect strong fair exchange or true fair exchange. What the e-commerce protocol can do is, during the execution, it can gather enough evidence during the protocol execution such that the wrongdoer can be brought to justice. So with the evidence, the honest party can prove his case in a court of law. Now, the dispute resolution is actually outside the scope of the protocol, and such protocols are termed as weak fair exchange protocols. Now, in our opinion, weak fair exchange is really not enough for e-commerce protocols, and the reason being that the e-commerce transactions might take place across international borders, and so if you say the dispute resolution, and dispute resolution in such cases is a non-trivial problem because different countries are governed by different laws. So what we want to do is that our protocol should ensure fair exchange always, by which we mean strong fair exchange. The next property that we are looking into is called cross-validation, and by this we mean that before a customer makes a payment, he must have assurance that the product that he's about to receive is the one he paid for. So as before, the customer says that he wants to purchase this product, and the merchant says it will be $25. So the customer sends a check of $25, and the merchant says, here is Mento Madness. So what can go wrong? So the merchant just simply disappears. The customer finds that this is not Mento Madness, this is just garbage. So he complains, and again he receives the same response that we cannot trace him. So in this particular scenario, an exchange has taken place, but the customer did not receive the item which he wanted. So that's why we have this next property, that somehow we must ensure that the product the customer is about to receive is indeed the one he's paying for. Now, one might argue that these two properties can be very easily achieved if we have a trusted third party. So we have the merchant, and we have the customer, and we have a trusted third party. So the merchant and the customer each send their respective items to the trusted third party. The trusted third party verifies the correctness of the items, and if so, then forwards the respective items to the parties. But the problem with that approach is that the third party is actively involved in the e-commerce transaction. So the third party can become a source of bottleneck and might even be a source of target for denial of service attacks. So the ideal solution is to do without the third party. However, it has been formally proved that fair exchange is impossible to ensure in the absence of a trusted third party. So our goal was to minimize the involvement of the trusted third party. So the trusted third party is there, and he will be invoked only if there is a problem. But in normal cases, when the parties are behaving correctly, then he won't be invoked. The third property that we think is very important for e-commerce transaction is anonymity, by which we mean that the customer cannot be linked to the e-commerce. The true identity of the customer cannot be linked to the e-commerce transaction. And let's see why this property is important. So as before, the customer wants to purchase some item, and the merchant says that it will be $25. And the customer has become clever, and he has said that I won't part with my money until I receive the until I receive the product. The merchant, on the other hand, is afraid of losing, so he, again, doesn't want to part with his good before he has received the money. So to solve this problem, the customer provides some kind of an assurance that says that he will make the payment once he receives the product. So he sends a guarantee. The merchant then sends the product, and the customer now sends the payment. So in this particular scenario, fair exchange has indeed taken place, because now the customer has received the correct product and the merchant has received the money. So fair exchange has taken place. But the merchant infers that this lady likes Jamaican music, spam her with other offers. So the customer receives a lot of spam and complains to the authority, and the authority says that this is not spam. You once did business with the merchant. So in this case, this is a very simple consequence of breaching anonymity, but there can be even more serious consequences, because if the anonymity of the compromised, for identity thefts and things like that, it might be very important for some customers to preserve their anonymity. So this is another property we think is very important for the e-commerce transaction. So we want to ensure that a transaction cannot be linked or traced back to a particular customer. And sometimes the merchant wants to also maintain anonymity, but more than oftentimes the customer wants to maintain anonymity. The merchant, in our protocol, we can provide anonymity for the customer as well as for the merchant. But in this version of the protocol, we just discuss about the anonymity of the customer. So here, these are the three properties that we are looking at. And now we give some background on the kinds of keys that we use in our protocol. So the first kind, which we write as asymmetric keys, those are the similar kinds of keys that are used in public key crypto systems. And then we define a notion of compatibility of keys. So two keys are compatible if they share the same exponent, and n1 and n2 are relatively prime. And E is relatively prime to phi n1 and phi n2, where phi n1 and phi n2 are Euler's totient functions. So this is our notion of compatible keys. And based on the notion of compatible keys, we define what is known as the product key. So the product key, K1 cross K2, is defined as, so the exponent is E, and the modulus is N1 times N2. And the notation MKI means that M is encrypted with the key Ki. And the nice property of the product key is that if you encrypt an item with the product key, you can decrypt it with any of the individual compatible keys. So in other words, if M is encrypted with K1 cross K2, you can decrypt it using either K1 inverse or K2 inverse. So that is one very important property of product key. And the other property is that when M is encrypted with K1 cross K2, and that is congruent to M hat K1 mod N1 only if M is equal to M hat. And this feature is used by the customer for product validation. So these are the only two different kinds of keys that we use in our protocol. And now we begin talking about the protocol in details. So we have, who are the actors? So we have the customer, and because the customer is interested in maintaining his anonymity, he assumes a pseudo identity C. Then we have the merchant,